that some of the reasons why Arminianism is so popular and where it's the basic starting point for most of us in our theological thinking has to do with the education that we receive in the Western world, particularly here in the United States, with respect to our understanding of human freedom. Arminianism arose originally in the 17th century as a protest against Calvinism and against what were then the so-called 5 points of Calvinism. And I think the two driving forces for the popularity of Arminianism are these. First of all, the Arminian is concerned to maintain and protect the integrity and the reality of the human will. And many Arminian thinkers believe that the Reformed doctrines of soteriology basically destroy the reality of human freedom. That's one consideration. I think the other driving force for Arminianism and why it's so popular with many people is that many Christians who hear the Reformed doctrine of predestination and election think that it sounds, at least on the surface, as being unfair, and because it seems to be unfair, it therefore casts a shadow over the holiness and righteousness of God. And so I think Arminianism is driven by those two poles. One, to protect the reality of human freedom, and two, to protect the integrity of God himself. Now, of course, as a Reformed thinker, I think that Arminianism is incorrect on both of those particular fronts. I think, as I mentioned, the educational system in the West drums into our thinking from a very early age an idea of freedom that is frankly unbiblical. It's not only unbiblical, but it's basically pagan. That is, it's the idea that human free will functions indifferently. That is, it has the same power to choose the good as it has to choose evil. And this, of course, is on a collision course with the biblical teaching of our situation. The Bible teaches us that we make choices, that we are volitional creatures, and that we have the ability to choose what we want to do. But that's the problem, is that our want to, our desires, are enslaved to sin. And so to think of free will as an indifferent, equal power to go in either direction is, as I said, simply unbiblical. The Bible tells us that we make our choices and we choose what we want to choose, but the want to is enslaved by our sinful inclinations. Secondly, with respect to the character of God, I think that the Reformed understanding of election is an amazing testimony to the supreme and superb graciousness of God, where the emphasis is focused on God's divine mercy as well as his sovereignty. I've never talked to a Christian who has said to me that they don't believe that God is sovereign. I ask that question, do you believe that God is sovereign? They say, of course we believe that God is sovereign. Well, God is sovereign with respect to the universe that he's made. He's sovereign with respect to his right to command obedience to his law. We understand sovereignty in those categories. But as soon as we speak about God's sovereignty with respect to the bestowing of his grace, so much belief in sovereignty begins to disappear. But where Paul emphasizes the point in Romans 9 particularly, he asks the question, first of all, after articulating the doctrine of election, what does this mean, that there is unrighteousness in God? This is this particular objection that is raised by Arminianism again and again and again. And one of the reasons why I'm convinced that I'm understanding Paul in Romans is that because every time I teach the Reformed doctrine of election, I get the same objection from my Arminian friends. There's unrighteousness in God. And in fact, that Paul's anticipating that response, gives me confidence that I've understood the position he's coming from. But then he goes on to say that God had spoken to Moses, saying, I will have mercy upon whom I will have mercy. That God's grace, by definition, is never something that can be earned or deserved or merited. It's freely given by his sovereignty.